The holographic display flickered one final time before dissolving into static, taking with it the last communication from the Galactic Council. Captain Janice Voss stood in the command center of the TSS Resolute, her weathered hands gripping the metal rail as she watched the death of an empire that had stood for 3 millennia. "Ma'am." Lieutenant Commander Torres approached cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've lost contact with all remaining Council vessels. The Nexus, it's gone." Janice closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle into her bones. The Nexus had been more than just the administrative center of the intergalactic empire. It had been the beating heart of civilization itself, a massive station that coordinated trade, diplomacy, and defense across 47 star systems. Now it was nothing but debris floating in the void, captured by an enemy humanity barely understood. "How many made it out?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. 17 ships, Captain. Out of the entire Third Fleet." Torres's voice cracked slightly. "We're all that's left of the Imperial Navy in this sector." Janice opened her eyes and turned to face her bridge crew. They looked at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, these young officers who had never known a universe without the Empire's protection. She had been their age once, fresh out of the academy on New Geneva, full of dreams about exploring the stars and protecting the innocent. Now, at 53, she was one of the few remaining who remembered when humanity had first ventured beyond Earth's solar system. "Status report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The Corvaxi fleet has established a perimeter around the Nexus ruins," reported Chief Navigator Yuki Tanaka. "Long-range sensors indicate they're salvaging Imperial technology and setting up some kind of structure. It's massive, Captain. Bigger than anything we've seen them build before." The Corvaxi. Even the names sent chills through the crew. They had appeared 6 months ago from beyond the galactic rim, their ships black as the void between stars and seemingly immune to most Imperial weapons. Their first contact had been the complete annihilation of the mining colony on Kepler 442b. No demands, no negotiations, just death. "What about the other sectors?" Janice asked. "Any word from the 7th Fleet?" "The 9th. Communications Officer Sarah Chin shook her head, her hands dancing across her console. "Nothing from command. The quantum relay network is down across 3 sectors. We're on our own, Captain." Janice nodded slowly. She had suspected as much. The Corvaxi had been systematic in their assault, targeting communication hubs and supply lines before moving on to population centers. It was a strategy that spoke of careful planning and deep intelligence about Imperial defenses. "Set course for the Titan shipyards," she ordered. "Maximum burn." "Captain," Torres said hesitantly, "the shipyards were hit 3 days ago. Our drones reported heavy damage. Then we'll see what's left to salvage." "And Lieutenant Commander." "Yes, ma'am. Send a coded transmission to any Imperial vessels that might be listening. Tell them Captain Janice Voss of the Terran Fleet is calling for a gathering. It's time to make our stand." As the Resolute's engines roared to life, Janice stared out at the stars that had once seemed so full of promise. Somewhere out there, the Corvaxi were consolidating their victory, probably believing they had crushed humanity's spirit along with its ships. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Titan shipyards had been humanity's crown jewel, a massive construction facility that orbited the gas giant Prometheus in the Kepler 186 system. Even damaged, it was an impressive sight. Kilometers of docking bays, fabrication units, and research facilities that had once produced the Empire's most advanced vessels. Now, nearly half of it was twisted metal and venting atmosphere, the result of a concentrated Corvaxi attack. But it wasn't dead. As the Resolute approached, Janice counted 17 ships already docked or maintaining position nearby. Word had spread faster than she'd expected, and survivors were answering the call. "Incoming transmission from the TNS Defiant," Chin reported. "It's Admiral Martinez." Janice felt a spark of hope. Elena Martinez had been one of the Empire's most capable commanders, known for her tactical brilliance and her ability to inspire fierce loyalty in her crews. If she had survived, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. "Put her through." Admiral Martinez's weathered face appeared on the main screen. She looked as exhausted as Janice felt, but her dark eyes still burned with determination. Janice, good to see you're still alive. Likewise, Elena. What's our situation? Not good. We've got 23 ships total, mostly cruisers and destroyers. The Korvaxi hit the yards hard, but the engineering teams managed to save about 30% of the facilities. More importantly, they didn't get to the research division. Janice raised an eyebrow. The research division at Titan had been working on classified projects, technologies that might give them an edge against the seemingly invincible Korvaxi. What did they find? That's something we need to discuss in person. How soon can you dock? 15 minutes. Good. Conference room 7.
And Janice?
Bring your department heads. We have a lot to discuss. The connection ended, leaving Janice with more questions than answers. She turned to Torres. You have the bridge. I'll take Dr. Reeves and Commander Sean with me. Dr. Marcus Reeves was the Resolute's chief science officer, a brilliant xenobiologist who had been studying Korvaxi technology whenever they could get samples. Commander Lisa Sean headed up the tactical department and had been working tirelessly to develop new weapons and strategies. The docking process was tense. The automated systems were badly damaged, requiring manual guidance to bring the Resolute safely into Bay 7. As they walked through the station's corridors, Janice could see the signs of hasty repairs everywhere. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows, and the air carried the acrid smell of welding torches and recycled atmosphere. Conference room 7 was packed with officers from across the remnant fleet. Janice recognized some faces: Captain Rodriguez from the destroyer Vanguard, Commander Okafor from the cruiser Horizon, Major General Patterson from the Marine contingent. Others were strangers, survivors from ships she'd never heard of. Admiral Martinez stood at the head of the room, her uniform crisp despite everything they'd been through. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know we're all tired, angry, and more than a little scared. But we're here because we have a job to do. She activated the room's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the local sector. Red markers indicated Korvaxi positions, while blue ones showed their own forces. The picture was stark. They were outnumbered at least 50-1. The Korvaxi have established 3 major staging areas, Martinez continued. The Nexus ruins, the Arcturus station, and the Vega mining complex. From these positions, they're launching systematic strikes against remaining Imperial forces and civilian populations. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. Any word from the core worlds? Nothing. We have to assume they're either cut off or... Martinez let the implication hang in the air. The point is, we're on our own. 23 ships against an enemy that destroyed the greatest navy in galactic history. The room fell silent. Janice could feel the weight of despair settling over the group like a physical thing. These were good officers, brave men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. But they were also realists, and the math was simple: they couldn't win. However, Martinez continued, her voice gaining strength, we have one advantage they don't know about. Dr. Yolanda Vasquez, would you please share your findings? A middle-aged woman in a lab coat stepped forward. Janice recognized her as one of the Empire's leading xenotechnologists, someone who had been working on reverse engineering alien technology for decades. 3 months ago, our teams at Titan recovered several intact Korvaxi devices from the battle at Proxima Centauri, Dr. Vasquez began. What we found was disturbing, but also potentially useful. She manipulated the holographic display, showing the molecular structure of what appeared to be some kind of crystal formation. Korvaxi technology is based on what we're calling quantum resonance matrices. Essentially, their ships, weapons, and even their bodies are synchronized to specific quantum frequencies. Commander Sean spoke up. What kind of frequencies? That's the key, Vasquez replied. The frequencies are artificially generated, not naturally occurring, which means they can be disrupted. We've been working on a prototype weapon that can destabilize these quantum matrices. The room buzzed with excited conversation. Janice felt a flicker of hope, but she was experienced enough to know that prototype weapons were a long way from battlefield reality. "What's the catch?" she asked. Vasquez's expression grew grim. "The weapon requires enormous amounts of energy to function. We're talking about the complete power output of a Dreadnought-class ship. And even then, the range is limited to about 50,000 kilometers. That's point-blank range in space combat," Rodriguez observed. "Exactly. Which means we'd have to get very close to a Corvaxi fleet to use it. And we'd only get one shot." Admiral Martinez nodded. "Which brings us to the mission. Long-range reconnaissance has identified a new Corvaxi installation at the Nexus ruins. It appears to be some kind of command center, possibly coordinating their entire campaign in this sector." She changed the display to show the Nexus system. The ruins of the Great Station were surrounded by a complex web of Corvaxi ships and structures. At the center was something that defied easy description, a massive construct that seemed to bend light around itself. "If we can destroy that installation, we might be able to disrupt their operations long enough for Imperial reinforcements to arrive from the core worlds," Martinez continued. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we have." Janice studied the display, her tactical mind already working through the possibilities. "How many ships are we talking about?" "At least 200 in the immediate area. Possibly more in reserve." The room fell silent again. The numbers were staggering. Even with their new weapon, they'd be facing odds of nearly 10 to 1. "I know what you're thinking," Martinez said. "It's suicide."
And you're probably right.
"But if we don't try, if we just run and hide, then the Corvaxi will eventually hunt us down anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting." Major General Patterson cleared his throat. "What about civilian evacuation? There are still millions of people in the outer colonies." "That's part of the plan," Martinez replied. "While the main fleet engages the Corvaxi at the Nexus, smaller ships will coordinate evacuation efforts. We save who we can, but our primary objective is to hurt the enemy." Janice looked around the room at the faces of her fellow officers. She saw fear, yes, but also determination. These were people who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, and they weren't about to abandon that oath now. "When do we leave?" she asked. 72 hours. That should give us enough time to make repairs, redistribute supplies, and brief the crews. Any questions?" Commander Sean raised her hand. "What about the quantum disruptor? Which ship gets it?" Martinez looked directly at Janice. "The Resolute. Captain Voss will be leading the strike team." The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Janice felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. She would be the one to get close enough to use the weapon, the one to make the shot that might save what was left of human civilization. "Any objections?" Martinez asked. There were none. The Resolute was a heavy cruiser, fast enough to penetrate enemy lines and tough enough to survive the approach. More importantly, Janice had a reputation for pulling off impossible missions. Then it settled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our orders. Let's get to work." As the meeting broke up, Janice found herself walking alongside Dr. Reeves and Commander Sean toward their shuttle. The corridors seemed quieter now, filled with the weight of what they were about to attempt. "Captain," Dr. Reeves said quietly, "what are our actual chances of success?" Janice considered the question carefully. "Honestly, maybe 5%. But that's 5% more than we had an hour ago." "And the crew? How do we tell them we're essentially on a suicide mission?" "We don't," Janice replied firmly. "We tell them we're going to strike back at the enemy who destroyed our homes. We tell them we're going to make the Corvaxi pay for what they've done. And we tell them that no matter what happens, they're serving alongside the finest people in the galaxy." Commander Sean nodded slowly. "The crew will follow you anywhere, Captain. You know that." "I know. And that's what scares me most of all." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. The Resolute's crew worked around the clock, making repairs, installing the quantum disruptor, and preparing for what many suspected would be their final mission. Janice found herself everywhere at once, consulting with engineers about power distribution, meeting with department heads about tactical scenarios, and trying to maintain morale among a crew that knew the odds they were facing. The quantum disruptor itself was an impressive piece of technology, a sleek device about the size of a torpedo that would replace the ship's primary particle cannon. Dr. Vasquez's team had worked tirelessly to integrate it with the Resolute systems, but the installation was complex and dangerous. The power coupling is stable, reported Chief Engineer Knox, a grizzled veteran who had been keeping the ship running for 15 years. But, Captain, I have to tell you, firing this thing is going to drain our entire power grid. We'll have maybe 30 seconds of auxiliary power before we're completely dead in space. Janice nodded grimly. What about the targeting system? Dr. Vasquez's people have programmed it to lock onto quantum resonance signatures. Once we're in range, it should automatically target the largest concentration of Corvaxi technology. Should. Knox shrugged. It's new technology, Captain. We won't know if it works until we fire it. That evening, Janice called a meeting with her senior staff. The conference room felt different now, charged with the tension of an approaching battle. She looked around the table at faces she had come to know well over the past 3 years. Torres with his unwavering loyalty, Commander Sean with her tactical brilliance, Dr. Reeves with his scientific curiosity, and Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sarah Park, who had patched up more wounded crew members than anyone cared to count. The mission plan is simple, Janice began, activating the holographic display. We jump in with the main fleet, engage the Corvaxi perimeter, and push through to the central installation. Once we're within 50,000 kilometers, we fire the quantum disruptor. What about after we fire? Asked Dr. Park. That depends on whether the weapon works. If it does, we withdraw with the rest of the fleet. If it doesn't, Janice let the words hang in the air. Torres leaned forward. Captain, I've been thinking about the crew. Some of them are barely out of the academy. They have families, futures. I know. Janice's voice was soft. But they also have a duty. And right now, that duty is to stop the Corvaxi from destroying everything we've built. Commander Sean pulled up a tactical display. I've been running simulations. Even with the element of surprise, we're going to take heavy casualties. The Corvaxi have had months to fortify their positions around the Nexus. What about alternative approaches? Dr. Reeves asked. Could we use the quantum disruptor from a longer range? Not according to Dr. Vasquez's team. The quantum fields decay exponentially with distance. At anything beyond 50,000 kilometers, the effect would be negligible. Dr. Park spoke up. What about the other ships? Are we just using them as a distraction? No, Janice replied firmly. Every ship in the fleet has a role to play. The destroyers will screen us from enemy fighters. The cruisers will engage their capital ships. And the supply vessels will coordinate rescue operations for survivors. She paused, looking at each of them in turn. I won't lie to you. This is going to be the hardest thing any of us has ever done. But we're not doing it for glory or recognition. We're doing it because someone has to make a stand. The meeting continued for another hour, going over tactical details and contingency plans. By the time they finished, Janice felt mentally exhausted. But there was still one more thing she needed to do. She made her way to the observation deck, a small chamber near the bow where crew members often went to think. The massive viewport showed the Titan shipyards in all their damaged glory, with the fleet spread out around them like a constellation of hope. Couldn't sleep either? Janice turned to find Admiral Martinez standing in the doorway. The older woman looked tired but determined, her gray hair pulled back in a military regulation bun. Too much to think about, Janice admitted. Martinez joined her at the viewport. I've been commanding ships for 30 years, and I've never ordered people into a situation like this. Any regrets? About the mission?
No.
About the circumstances that led us here? Plenty. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when we first met? You were a lieutenant on the Excalibur. Janice smiled despite herself. The Rigel incident. You were the one who convinced Captain Morrison to let me lead the boarding party. You were so young, so eager to prove yourself. I knew then that you'd go far. Not far enough to prevent this, Janice said bitterly. Don't do that to yourself. The Corvaxi aren't our fault. They're a force of nature, like a hurricane or a plague. All we can do is respond to them. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the fleet preparations. Small shuttles moved between ships, carrying supplies and personnel. Work crews continued their repairs, sparks flying from cutting torches and welding equipment. "Elena," Janice said finally, "if we don't make it back, you'll make it back. You always do. And if I don't," Martinez turned to face her, "then you'll have died fighting for something worth dying for." That's more than most people can say. The next morning brought final preparations. The quantum disruptor was fully integrated and tested. The crew had received their briefings and said their goodbyes. Supply ships had distributed ammunition, medical supplies, and emergency rations. Janice stood on the bridge, watching the controlled chaos of departure preparations. The Resolute would be in the second wave, behind the destroyers, but ahead of the heavy cruisers. It was a position that would give them the best chance of reaching the Corvaxi installation. "All stations report ready," Torres announced. "Very well. Signal the fleet. Begin jump sequence." The next few minutes were filled with the familiar routine of hyperspace preparation. Engines charged, navigational computers calculated trajectories, and the crew strapped themselves into their stations. Janice felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that always preceded a jump. "Jump in 10 seconds, reported Navigator Tanaka. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 mark." The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of light, and then the Resolute was in hyperspace. The journey to the Nexus would take 18 hours, time enough for the crew to rest, make final preparations, and steel themselves for what was to come. But as Janice settled into her command chair, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were jumping into more than just hyperspace. They were jumping into history, into a moment that would determine the fate of human civilization. The die was cast. In less than a day, they would either strike a blow for freedom or die trying. There was no middle ground, no room for half measures. The Corvaxi had taught them that much. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Resolute dropped out of hyperspace to a scene from a nightmare. The Nexus system, once a bustling center of galactic civilization, had been transformed into a monument to destruction. Where the Great Station had once orbited, now only debris fields remained, twisted metal and shattered dreams floating in the void. But it was what the Corvaxi had built among the ruins that truly chilled Janice to the bone. The alien installation dominated the center of the system, a massive structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, and energy discharges crackled between towering spires that reached impossibly high into space. "My God," whispered Dr. Reeves from his station. "What is that thing?" "Whatever it is, it's big," reported Navigator Tanaka. "Sensors indicate it's at least 50 kilometers across and growing." Growing. The word sent a chill down Janice's spine. The Corvaxi weren't just occupying the Nexus, they were transforming it into something else entirely. "Contact Admiral Martinez," she ordered. "Get me a tactical update." The fleet had dropped out of hyperspace in a loose formation, spread across several million cubic kilometers to avoid presenting a concentrated target. Even so, Janice could see on her displays that the Corvaxi were already responding to their arrival. "Admiral Martinez is on Channel 1, reported Communications Officer Chen. "Janice, I hope you're seeing what I'm seeing." Martinez's voice was tight with tension. "The installation? Hard to miss. What's our status?" "Corvaxi fleet is moving to intercept. I count at least 300 ships, probably more in reserve. They're forming a defensive perimeter around the installation." Janice studied her tactical display. The enemy ships were unlike anything in the Imperial database, sleek, organic-looking vessels that seemed to shift and flow like living things. Their formations were precise but alien, following patterns that human tacticians had never encountered. "Orders, Admiral? Proceed as planned. Phase 1 begins in 10 minutes. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Janice watched as the enemy fleet deployed, their ships moving with an eerie coordination that suggested some kind of hive mind. The Corvaxi had learned from their earlier encounters with Imperial forces, adapting their tactics to counter human strategies. "All ships, this is Admiral Martinez. Execute Phase 1. Good hunting. The first wave of the attack began with a barrage of long-range missiles. 200 Imperial torpedoes streaked across the void, their nuclear warheads aimed at the Korvaxi perimeter. The enemy response was immediate and devastating. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from their ships, detonating most of the missiles before they could reach their targets. But the attack served its purpose. While the Korvaxi focused on the missile threat, the Imperial destroyers moved in, their smaller size and higher speed allowing them to penetrate the enemy formation. The battle was joined in earnest. Signal from the Vanguard, Chin reported. Captain Rodriguez is requesting fire support. Janice could see the destroyer on her display, surrounded by Korvaxi fighters and taking heavy damage. Sean, target those fighters. All batteries, fire at will. The Resolute's weapon systems came online with a sound like thunder. Particle beams and pulse cannons reached out across the void, finding their targets among the swarming enemy fighters. The Korvaxi ships were fast and maneuverable, but they weren't invincible. Direct hit on Fighter Group 7, reported Weapons Officer Lieutenant Morrison. 2 confirmed kills. But for every Korvaxi ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy had committed overwhelming numbers to the defense of their installation, and they were using them with ruthless efficiency. Captain, Torres said urgently, we're getting reports of casualties from across the fleet. The Intrepid has lost main power. The Defiant is venting atmosphere from her port side. Janice gritted her teeth. The plan had always called for heavy losses, but seeing it happen was different from discussing it in a briefing room. These were good people, friends and colleagues who were dying to give her a chance to reach the installation. Distance to target? She asked. 800,000 kilometers and closing, Tanaka reported. We're on course, but we're going to have to punch through their main fleet to get there. Then, that's what we'll do. Sean, prepare for close quarters combat. All hands, this is the captain. We're going in. The next phase of the battle was chaos. The Resolute plunged into the heart of the Korvaxi formation, her hull reverberating with the impact of enemy weapons. The ship's shields flared and sparked under the assault, but they held. Shield strength at 60%, reported Engineer Knox over the intercom. Switching to backup generators. Around them, the battle raged with an intensity that defied description. Imperial ships traded fire with Korvaxi vessels at point-blank range, their weapons creating a deadly light show against the star-filled backdrop. The destroyer Valiant exploded in a ball of fire and debris, taking a Korvaxi cruiser with her. The heavy cruiser Adamant rammed an enemy ship, both vessels disappearing in a brilliant flash. We're through their outer perimeter, Tanaka announced. Distance to installation, 200,000 kilometers. But the hardest part was still ahead. The Korvaxi had positioned their most powerful ships around the installation itself, forming a defensive ring that would be nearly impossible to penetrate. These weren't the sleek fighters and light cruisers they had been fighting. These were massive capital ships, each one bristling with weapons and protected by shields that could deflect anything in the Imperial arsenal. I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the installation, Dr. Reeves reported. It's charging some kind of weapon. Janice felt her blood run cold. If the Korvaxi had a superweapon, something that could destroy multiple ships at once, then the entire attack would be for nothing. How long before it's ready to fire? Unknown. The energy patterns are unlike anything we've seen before. Then we don't have time to be subtle. All ships, this is Captain Voss. Emergency acceleration. We're going in fast and hard. The Resolute's engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward at maximum burn. G-forces pressed the crew into their seats as the ship accelerated toward the installation. Around them, the surviving Imperial ships followed suit, their commanders understanding that their only hope lay in reaching the target before the Korvaxi superweapon could fire. 100,000 kilometers, Tanaka announced. Korvaxi capital ships are moving to intercept. The enemy vessels were huge, easily twice the size of the Resolute, and they moved with ponderous grace through the void. Their weapons were unlike anything in the Imperial database, beams of energy that seemed to bend space itself, creating gravitational anomalies that could tear a ship apart. Evasive maneuvers, Janice ordered. "Don't let them get a lock on us." The Resolute twisted and turned through space, her pilot Lieutenant Commander Hayes pushing the ship to its limits. Behind them, the cruiser Horizon wasn't as lucky. Caught by a gravity beam, the ship was pulled apart like taffy, her crew lost in seconds. 75,000 kilometers, Tanaka called out. "We're almost in range." But the cost was becoming apparent. Of the 23 ships that had started the mission, only 8 remained. The others had been destroyed or disabled in the desperate push toward the installation. The survivors were battered and damaged, their crews exhausted, and their ammunition running low. 55,000 kilometers, Tanaka announced. "Still closing." "Power levels?" Janice asked. "At maximum. The quantum disruptor is fully charged and ready to fire." Janice looked at her crew, these brave men and women who had followed her into hell itself. They deserved better than this. They deserved to go home to their families, to live normal lives far from the horrors of war. But fate had other plans. 50,000 kilometers, Tanaka said quietly. "We're in range." Janice took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of human civilization. Around them, the surviving ships of the fleet continued to fight, buying her precious seconds to line up the shot. "Dr. Vasquez, are you ready?" The scientist's voice came over the intercom, tense but determined. "All systems are green. The quantum disruptor is locked onto the installation's central core. Fire." The quantum disruptor activated with a sound like reality tearing. A beam of coherent energy lanced out from the Resolute, striking the Korvaxi installation at its heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien structure began to convulse, its geometric patterns shifting and changing as the quantum disruption spread through its matrix. "Direct hit," reported Dr. Vasquez. "The quantum resonance is cascading through their entire structure." The installation shuddered and began to collapse in on itself, its dark spires crumbling and its energy discharges becoming erratic. The effect spread to the nearby Korvaxi ships, their own quantum matrices destabilizing in a chain reaction that no one had expected. "It's working," breathed Commander Sean. "The entire enemy fleet is being affected." But the victory came at a cost. The quantum disruptor's massive energy requirements had drained the Resolute's power systems, leaving the ship helpless in the middle of the enemy formation. Warning lights flashed on every console, and the artificial gravity fluctuated dangerously. "All power is down," reported Engineer Knox. "We're running on emergency batteries only." Janice watched as the Korvaxi installation continued to collapse, taking with it what appeared to be the enemy's command structure. Around them, Korvaxi ships were either fleeing or destroying themselves in the quantum cascade. The plan had worked. They had struck a decisive blow against the enemy. But they were still trapped in the middle of hostile space, with no power and no way to escape. The Resolute drifted helplessly among the debris of the installation, her crew awaiting whatever fate would bring. "Captain," Torres said quietly, "it's been an honor serving with you." Janice nodded, feeling the weight of command and the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. They had done what seemed impossible. They had hurt the enemy and given humanity a chance to survive. Now all they could do was wait and see if their sacrifice had been worth it.